look at the data and the information and understand what the offenses were and what the results of those offenses were in terms of the experiences of our young people. But we wanted to bring a voice to the table that was not just a system voice. It needed to be a voice of the experience of people in our communities who really were, continue to, in fact, experience this circumstance of young people becoming involved in the juvenile correction system as a real emergency, a real crisis.
Well, I think we've heard a perfect example of why we needed to find alternatives to detention. So, Michael, what have you seen as far as results so far?
Maybe we can show the slide that shows our average daily population and the direction that it's gone since actually before we began the initiative. Back in 2005, just before we began the initiative, our 85-bed detention center, maximum security lockup for youth, has a capacity of about 85 beds, and it had an average daily population of 89 youth. And since that 2005 and to the second quarter of 2009, the average daily population has gone down about 60%. So that's the area, and that's the direction that you want to go in terms of your detention population. And at the same time, I would add that correspondingly, the crime rate has gone down as well. So I'm one of those bold people that says that there's a correlation between our detention population and the crime rate. It's a counterintuitive correlation based on traditional thinking. Traditional thinking is the more kids you lock up, the safer your community. But our research and our work in JDAI has shown that that's not necessarily the case, that it's the right kids in detention.
The point that the chart makes is the point that led to the creation of this initiative by the Casey Foundation. The exact opposite happened during the 90s. Juvenile crime rate dropped precipitously, and the detention rate of kids went up. All right? So we had fewer kids committing crime, but more kids going to detention. And when we sort of peel back the onion on that, we found out that heart to heart, the juvenile crime rate had gone down, and the kids who were getting locked up were for very minor offenses or for no offenses at all, probation violations, where they failed to go to counseling or something like that. So there was no correlation, direct correlation at that point. There was a discorrelation, if you will, between the crime level, particularly the serious crime level, and what was going on in our detention centers. And even when I started working in Ramsey County in 06 with the collaborative here, the initial data we looked at, and this initiative is data-driven. We don't do anything by whim, caprice, surmise, guesswork. We looked at what the data is telling us in very critical areas. And what we saw were we were holding close to capacity of children, but most of these children had not committed a violent offense. They were what I call POE kids, pissed off an adult. An adult gets pissed at them, and like a probation officer.
Or we call it felony mouth in schools.
Felony mouth kids, yeah. And we were holding those kids in detention, and not long, a couple of days. But it was really not an efficient use of the detention center. It was really harmful to the kids, and it really didn't solve the problem that you may have with the kid. And that's when the collaborative started working on alternate opportunities for kids. And as we did that and got that going, community, the Disparities Committee to reduce racial and ethnic disparities, we started to see this precipitous decline in the use of detention and coincidentally, a precipitous decline in juvenile crime.
And maybe it's either Sarah or Tony who have been with us from day one, maybe can talk about the structure, because I think that shows the strength, at least from my perspective. I was kidding. I graduated, I say, from juvenile court a couple of weeks ago. Chief Judge moved me back to adult felonies, and I served, I think it was 1,875 days up in juvenile court, but I had 1,892 meetings, I always like to kid. But I think that shows the strength, because not only it wasn't people from within the system, but it was people from out the system that's donating their time, coming to meetings at either morning meetings, noon meetings, evening meetings, but maybe talk a little bit about the structure. Not a lot of time because we'll really put people to sleep, but I think it shows what we did.
I think it's really important that we have Judge Bastian as a co-chair, who has served as a co-chair of this initiative for the entire duration along with me, that we were able to show that our courts really cared about being able to change and do things differently. Additionally, we were able to bring in members of the community from our schools, from the police, from other departments in Ramsey County, from throughout the community, to sit at the table with us and to man a number of committees that looked at various aspects of this work. A committee that created the purpose of detention, that created the charge for all of us, a committee that looked at the risk assessment instrument and how we were going to determine what juveniles need to be in and what didn't need to be. People that looked at the conditions inside our detention centers, that looked at how we're processing cases. And people from various areas and walks of life chaired these committees and diligently attended and have accomplished this work. But it isn't done. You know, we are still working together to engage ourselves in new frontiers around this work. And hopefully it will be the way that we will create that network that will assure that young people develop well within our communities.
See, the piece is that you open the door and you ask people their opinions. And then they're in the position where they don't want to stop giving opinions. So if you have a format, and that's our next big piece that we're going to look at is the DMC, or disproportionate minority confinement or contacts. The C's are interchangeable, but we have a lot of work to do because as Michael says, as we had fewer kids in detention, the percent of kids of color went up. And I don't know, Michael, if you have another slide you want to talk to at this point?
Well, we have a slide that shows the average daily population of youth of color in detention. Can you bring that slide up? Okay. Again, pre-JDAI, now this is not percentages. These numbers you see are not percentages, but pre-JDAI in 2005, the average daily population of youth of color in our secure lockup was 49.5.
And if you recall the earlier bar chart, that 49.5 was based on an average daily population of 89.
That's correct. And now on the second quarter of 2009, there has been a 53% decrease in the youth of color. Again, raw numbers, to 23.3. A youth of color in our detention center on an average daily basis. So to me, that's a significant drop in raw numbers of youth of color. That means 53% less youth in our detention center exposed to the detention experience. Unfortunately, during the same time, when you start doing this work, you find out that frequently the percentage of youth goes up. And so, do we have that slide? Okay. It's coming up? Okay. All right. The percentage of youth of color frequently goes up. And however, in this quarter, the second quarter of 2009, for the very first time, and since we began this process, the percentage of youth in our daily population, youth of color, has actually gone down by about 8 or 9%.
Michael, could you explain to our viewers what the cost is to house a youth in detention versus the alternatives?
Well, as I recall, the last figures that I looked at and worked on are the per diem for a bed in our detention center is about $300 a day.
Wow.
So you can do the math. I can't, but someone can do the math. They kind of figure out what
judges can't do it. We didn't go into be judges because we were good at math. Tony, you wanted to
I just wanted to add very quickly that, you know, it is a national phenomenon that we see that kind of dilemma, that the numbers of juveniles of color are going down with JDAI, but that percentage has not come down. It's actually gone up. It's fortunate that we've seen a tick down this past period. It's not a trend yet. You know, we know that we need